Well, thank you, Jackie. We're going to get a handoff from you. Jackie Saxton is back on the board. We don't see enough of Jackie, but tonight she is filling in for Dwight, handling the logistics of the call. But welcome. I'm on with Dave Shepard, who's become a regular co-host and is really becoming an expert on all things Maryland. And we're on
Yeah,
with
it's
Dave.
yeah, it's
Go
weird.
ahead.
I'm in Virginia, and I've been I know so many Maryland conservatives now that it's interesting. So um, it's good. It's a good thing, but just so many people I've met.
And you now
Dave,
know St. Mary's County.
Yeah, I was in
so,
St. Mary's, so it's great. So it's a beautiful state, and it's there are more Republicans than I thought in Maryland. You discover that it's maybe a blue state, but yet you still have a lot of good Republicans everywhere you go.
well, thank you for that. So our guest tonight is Dave Mossberger of Secure the Vote Maryland, which has been a very effective advocacy group on behalf of election integrity. And I've had the pleasure of working with a number of members of that, particularly Kate Sullivan, who couldn't be with us tonight. So Dave is filling in for her. Um, why don't you just kind of lead off, explain what Secure the Vote Maryland is for people who may not be familiar?
Sure. Secure the Vote is a grassroots organization. We have basically 35 active volunteers with more people in the mailing list. We meet every Saturday morning and we discuss, and we're totally focused on, I'll just say, restoring confidence in the election system here in Maryland. Um, Last few years, probably going back to 2018, people have started losing trust in the system in 2020 and all the things that were happening. Um, we just have to, they're just focused on restoring it. It's not about relitigating any past elections. It's about understanding what people's concerns are, understanding what are vulnerabilities in the system, and figuring out ways how we can work with the local boards and the state board of elections and the Maryland legislatures and others in the executive branch to figure out how we can kind of address some of the concerns and restore confidence.
Just it's worth probably giving a little background on some of the excellent research that you've done about the voter rolls, and that has been one of the real focus of the organization. Could
Sure.
you
And with
kind
that,
of explain, take us through the history of what you guys have been doing on that?
again, I'll go a little further back than that. I've been involved in trying to get Republicans elected here in Anne Arundel and Calvert, Charles, St. Mary's County for years. And in 2018, and I would always buy voter rolls. And I used to say, man, if given this voter rolls and the rolls in Maryland, I could go in there and vote for anybody because the only thing I need is their name, their address, and their date of birth. And for $125, I can buy it for all of Maryland. But I would never do anything like that. Well, in 2018, we had a local election here and we had a Republican county executive and they lost. I played sports my whole life. You win some, you lose some. But we went from winning, being a Republican county, to turn around and losing by 30 points. And I said to myself, and all the work I've ever done of phone banking, door knocking, mailers, messaging, you never turn around that you never make that make such a turn. I said something's not right, but let's keep going. It was in the back of my mind. Then came 2020, and that was the big Trump election, and watching election day, seeing all the momentum, and all at once you started seeing you're winning on election day, and these mail-in ballots start coming in, and more start coming in, and you see the things start happening late at night in Michigan, and you get these stories of people being blocked out, and you start asking, wow, from a confidence perspective, we're really losing confidence in our system. So I started looking around. I bought some voter rolls, and I'm an engineer by trade, so I deal with data. I deal with structured processing systems and, good system engineering procedures and processes. So I started looking at the data and looking for trends, anomalies. Then I got in touch with Robin Sachs and started kind of getting involved with her, Maryland Election Integrity, and then I met up with Kate, who I knew before, but she started to get involved, and then we got into the secure the vote. And then we started all looking at the data, going, what are some of the key things that others are talking about across the country that we can use and expand? And we started looking at things like duplicate voters. Maryland voter rolls have a unique ID. So every voting record has a unique ID, and they're unique. They're not duplicates. But when you start looking at the data, you'll notice we went down the path of saying same last name, same address, same date of birth, and said, are we seeing duplicates? And we found a lot of those. So we started investigating. And the way we would do this is don't look for trends. You see a lot of stuff out on the internet. Here's a trend. There's no way I can curve fit this. Probability of this happening is 0, but that's not actionable. That's nothing you can do. But if I see these duplicate registrations, we can go talk to these folks. And so we found out with that is there's a lot of twins and triplets that live in Maryland that live together around 50 years old. That was a shocker. We're like, they could be twins, but living together and 40, 50 years old. Well, there was too many of those for us to claim there was something wrong. So then I went through and said, look at the first name, address, date of birth. And we found a lot of those that matched. And we noticed things in there like the last name was more of a married name. So it would be the hyphenated maiden married name. Or we saw some in one case, the middle name was now the new last name. And then we looked at that and said, okay, these are problems with the voter rolls. Did they vote? And we found some of those where both of those records actually voted. We go to a step further when I said, well, we can do better matching of duplicates. So we went in to say same first name, same last name, same address, but now the date of birth is plus or minus 30 days. And to our surprise, we found a good number of those in Maryland that it was just the date of birth was off. And so again, we looked of those duplicate records, did any of them vote? And the answer was yes. So we said, well, we're on to something here, that there is a problem with the voter rolls. And, our goal is to get these cleaned up, get them to acknowledge there's a problem and get it cleaned up. So in that example, I went to the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections and I gave them the data. Well, first I had a good talk with them about what's good data, what's bad, what's actionable data. They're like, just don't give me, reams of data. Give me things that I can go in and we can action on. So we gave them these numbers, and 100% of those were true duplicates. And they went through and they would merge them. They have a process to merge them together, so you only end up with one record. And of the ones that voted, they gave that off to the state's attorney or state's prosecutor's office. And I don't know what happened, but we started regaining that confidence. And now people are looking at it saying, hey, the state's doing things. So that's just some examples of some of the data work that we did. And we would buy data rolls. We were buying them once a month from December 21 up until, I guess, the primary election last summer. We were buying them every month, approximately every month. So we could start looking at deltas along the way. And we've done delta analysis where we've noticed things like the date of birth is changing over time. That should be an immutable field. The registration date is changing over time. That should be, we think, a mutable field. So, we bring those things up to the board, local and state board of elections.
Well, it sounds to me very kind of good in the sense that there's some transparency. You're able to find these out and you're able to bring attention to the authorities. But is there a process where, how is it done? Is it all done by the county in terms of cleaning up the voter rolls, or is it a statewide process?
Well, that's a good question because I brought up Anne Arundel County because I know these folks living in Anne Arundel County, and I've always had a good reputation and relationship with them. So, but from the rest of the counties, I can't say the rest. Some of the majority of the other counties and the state have not been very supportive of this third party group bringing in data. So they do things to block you. They do things to just get in your way and say, well, I don't know your data sources. I don't trust your data source. I'm like, it's your source. I bought it from you. We bought it from you. And so it's been a battle, and we're making progress, and we're getting there. But that's been the hardest part. I mean, the most frustrating part is here is these volunteers who spend every Saturday morning, who write letters, who make calls, all to fix this system. They're told, we don't want your help. And it's our system. We're the citizens. We're the sovereign. It's our system. It's our government. Like, we're giving you free help just to make it a better system.
Yeah, I agree.
So David, it's probably worthwhile to kind of go a step further and talk about in aggregate the kind of numbers that you discovered.
Okay. So in 20 at around 2022, when we analyzed the records, we created what's a scorecard. We teamed up with United Sovereign America. That's a group that started out of New York, Marley Hornick, and now it's a national organization, and they wanted to look to standardize, make things consistent, and it's like a data group that you all learn from each other. So they have the concept of a scorecard, and so there's key areas that you can go in and run the data, and you create a scorecard. So, and here's an example of what it might look like. So it's got all kinds of, tables and pie charts and all kinds of nice stuff, and kind of front and back. So inside of the scorecard, we have things like, got to get these on, the registration violations. Like when we talked to, we did things like looking across the U.S. Postal Service. And the U.S. Postal Service, if you're a printer or you're doing a mailing, you can give them the list, and they'll do address corrections through what they call a CAS system. And then you can do, did the person move? So you can say, I don't want to send it to, if they're not in Maryland, or make sure that gets the right address through the National Change of Address. So we sent our data through one of those systems, and we would have things like folks that have a non-standard address. So in that case, you would, it would have like 300 votes on some of these active registrations that says they've moved at least 4 years ago. That was 5,600. So in that case, we don't have where they moved. We just know after 4 years, the post office just says they moved. But now when we had some of them that we actually had the addresses, we had people who were registered at post office boxes and mailboxes where, like, you can go to FedEx and you can get a box and they'll create it as a regular street address. We have some of those where the Maryland law says you should talk about, it should be your residential address.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that's where it has to mail, but you need to register with a registration address, and you can say, but mail it to a post office box. It's perfectly legal. But we had things that would say, it would be like a post office box 101. In the voter registration, it would say something like Suite 101. And you'd say, that sounds intentional.
Yeah, that's fishy. Not to interrupt,
Yeah.
but that's fishy to me. I mean, you got to use it's got to be a residential address. You can't be using a
And
PO.
those were like 3,600
Even just to send
votes.
it, you shouldn't be using a PO box. Just
Yeah, but there's some places in rural addresses where the post office doesn't deliver and it gets delivered to a local post office box and they come by and pick it up. That's legal. We never ever question that.
Mm.
But what it says is you're supposed to put your actual at location where you live
Yeah.
with the mail to location. And they talk about to some people, if like judges or people who are, you know, protected in court, they don't want their address in the voter rolls. So we found cases where they actually take them off and you don't get them. And they said in some cases they may put a post office box, but I'm not sure there's thousands and thousands of those.
I wouldn't think so.
So
We
Dave, could
found
you
people
kind of,
that deceased.
Mm.
Go ahead.
well, I was going to say, I mean, I've done my own research, and I found I live in a large apartment building. I know I've shared this story a couple of times. I started with people in my building who were over 100 in the voter rolls, who were over 100 years old, and went down and did a little search. And this is in 2022, but I found the Washington Post had an obituary for them in 2002, so 20 years ago, or 20 years prior to that. Same, because of the obituary, same date of birth and whatever, they had died in Florida. So it probably was a dual address status where they were getting mail and going down to Florida. So that's an example of where something that is anomaly shows up. Now that the person was dead, talk to me about what the response is when the Board of Elections, because they don't, as I understand, that's one of the issues that we've run into, is they are reluctant to take third party death notices. They want to be able to
Correct.
get it from very specific sources. Could you kind of elaborate on that? So I was using Washington Post obituary, same name, same date of birth, 20 years ago. Tell me what happens with the Board of Elections.
Yes, and along that we did something very similar. We teamed up with this group where you put the voter rolls and they had access to different data sources for date of birth, for deaths, and we would take screenshots of the obituaries and put them put them together with the URLs, and we gave a whole, I don't remember the exact number, but it was a large number of them, and they wanted to reject them all by saying it was not their official source. And they would say things like, we can't remove them just because you said so. And we have a hard time telling them that that's not what we want you to do. That's not what we expect you to do. We expect you to use these as help, because you know, you got millions of people in the voting rolls. You got a small staff. You can't, it's hard. We get it. It's complex to keep up. But here you got this group of volunteers that's willing to give you, let's say 100 people, that allows you now to go through the process. It's a manual process. It's got multiple steps for these 100, and maybe you can help clean the rolls. And they're like, well, nope, you're third party. That's not a source that we use. That's not an approved source. We can't remove them, even though we tell them we don't want you to remove them. We want you to investigate them through your process. So it's been a battle. Tomorrow there's a state board of elections meeting, and they're going to talk about the obituary process. So I sent a letter in for the meeting to tell them these groups that are going to local board of elections is only trying to help you, kind of, to by guiding you to the folks that are most likely dead. But it's up to you to determine, are their mails being turned? You need to make them inactive, and then after two federal elections, you can remove them according to NVRA. But why is this a conflict?
Yeah, I agree. What is the process though? I mean, without good groups like you and all your good volunteers, what would the ordinarily process to be to purge dead people from the rolls?
If they can get a death notice, they can take them out right away.
Okay.
If they have a tip, it might be through the newspaper or something, they can go ahead and send something through the post office. And if
Okay.
they don't get a response back, or if it's returned after like 2 or 3 mailers, they make them inactive.
Okay.
Then, after they're inactive to 2 federal elections, according to the federal statute, they can remove them.
So that is actually a very important point because we've found multiple examples where people have remained on the rolls without voting in 2 federal elections. And without getting into the details, there have been some games at the state level of adding the lists and then undoing the lists. So the example I gave of the person in my building who'd been on for 20 years, they should have been inactive like 16 years ago.
Yes.
There's no record of their voting. I will tell you, my son moved to Colorado 12 years ago, registered to vote in Colorado, but because the mail comes to our household, even though we've moved a couple of times, twice since he moved and registered in Colorado, the mail and the registration kept going on. When he died, unfortunately, it slipped through the crack because they hadn't identified him as being a Colorado voter. So in the last election, I got an absentee ballot application. So here's somebody hasn't lived in the state for over a decade, had already died, but they didn't identify him as having died, and hadn't voted in multiple, in Maryland at least, multiple federal elections, and yet continued to be on the rolls. So
Yeah.
one of the flaws in this process is, although the law says if you don't vote for 2 consecutive federal elections, you should be inactive, taken off the rolls.
No, that I thought that too. That's not the Maryland law. The really the only way you're supposed to become inactive is if for some reason they your mail has been returned. It's not you haven't voted. You can
It,
be active and on the rolls forever. That's not a trigger to become inactive.
and that is in fact one of the problems in the
Yes,
system is that you can continue on. This is sort of like Doge, and so you can continue on the rolls forever and ever. And if you've missed those early indicators where somebody moves to another state, there's a process with driver's license where information gets shared. If that doesn't get triggered, the person can continue on forever and ever. Now, it used to not matter quite so much when people would vote in person, right?
correct.
Because you'd show up in person, you could make a determination. That's not really the person. But under the current situation with voting by mail becoming more dominant, there's much more potential for
Correct.
somebody grabbing one of these applications and using it and voting it. And there's really less of a screen than there used to be when there was in-person voting.
Yeah, and I view a lot of things now as an engineer and been in cybersecurity for years, and it's all about the risk management. And one of the things you do is you look at the end-to-end system and you find out what are the vulnerabilities. And so you would look at mail-in ballot and say there are a lot of vulnerabilities here. What are we going to do to eliminate that or mitigate that risk? That's a problem I have with the Board of Elections and even the legislatures is they come at it from everything's fine. Let me explain to you how it's fine, and let's focus on voter accessibility. Whereas in a cybersecurity world, and this is a critical infrastructure, it's been defined critical, you should be looking at it from the perspective of a guy who's trying to break into the system. I mean, can you imagine all your computers and your power system if you just sit there, yeah, I'm going to trust people. They're not going to try to break into my computer. They're not going to try to break into my account because it's safe. It's safe because I tell you it's safe. That would never work, and that's not how it's done. You do things like red teams where you bring a person in and say, can you break into the system? And you have another team that says, can I detect them trying to break into my system? And after that exercise, you fix it. I'm like, why aren't we doing something similar like that to our voting systems? Because it's so important to our republic to have a fair, safe, transparent election. But they don't treat it that way. It's the craziest thing.
I
And they wonder
agree.
why people don't trust it.
I agree. Sometimes you think, and you don't seem like a particularly conspiratorial person, but do you sometimes think it's on purpose that they're not working with you, or they're fine with the system?
I have my personal views, and I try not to say that because I'm a God-loving Christian. I think for the most part people are good, and there are people who are, I believe, are being driven by Satan. So there will always be bad people in there that are looking for those. Now, is there an inside person? I have a hard. Everybody I've met at the Board of Elections, whether it's the official board or the people that work there, they're just they're American loving people. But the system is broke, and the system has these holes that allow others. And I also get it when I come in there. We come in there and we say, you've been doing this for 20 years, and let me tell you, it's all screwed up. It's all bad. You got
Mm.
all these, holes in there. I would get defensive. I would get
Yeah.
upset. I take it personal because it's my life.
Yeah.
So I try to work that. So I don't want to go in there conspiratorial. I want to go in there and say, we got some issues here. We need to work. We can work this together.
Well, it's a good attitude to have, I think, and it depends on where you go, I guess. Depends on who you deal with. Some counties maybe are better than others. I don't know.
And I think we've made progress. You can see it like we talked about this week. Tomorrow at the State Board of Elections, they're going to be talking about the obituaries. If you go to their website now, it lists all the Comar changes that are about to be discussed and voted on. In the past, you would never see those. But we've gone in, and that leads into the lawsuit that we had. In the lawsuit, as we started this exercise, we were going out and canvassing and talking to people, and we would ask them like one question: did you vote in 2022? Never who you voted for. I mean, if they started to talk about that, we'd say we're not interested. We
Yeah.
just want to know the validating roles. Did you vote? Yes, no. And then we'd move on. Some people would get upset. We trained our team to walk away.
Mhm.
Don't get in a conflict with them. Don't try to force them. Well, as we started doing this work, and we tried to do it from a mathematical, like using laws of statistics like you do when you do a poll, so that we can get, 95% confidence, that type of stuff. Very random sample, official sample using NIST standards. Um, as we started going down this path, they changed the oath. So when you buy a voter roll for $125, you would sign a oath that says this would only be used for election purposes, not for commercial. Like Kate likes to say, I'm going to go sell vacuum cleaners. You can't use it for that.
Mm.
And we take that serious. Well, as we started doing this, they changed the oath and then said, and you can only use it for election purposes. And investigating past elections is not election purposes.
Hmm.
So they tried to stop us. And
Mhm.
we're like, but this is against the National Voter Registration Act, NVRA. So
Mm.
that's when we got our lawyer to look at it. The Maryland Republican Party worked and got us a lawyer from Wright and Justin Reamer here in Anne Arundel County. And we put this lawsuit together to kind of force them to restore the oath. And so
Mm.
we won that. But that's an example of it would have been just so much easier and cheaper from our lawyers and the state using our tax dollars to pay for lawyers than to just work this out. I mean, they were saying you might intimidate somebody. Well, we'd say, well, can you give us an example? Because that's the last thing we want. And if it happened, we're going to tell people stop. But
Yeah.
everybody said no. If somebody has an issue. Now, I do know somebody called and said, these people came and knocked on my door, and we never claimed we were part of the Board of Elections. We always claim we put a name tag, we claim we're volunteers, but that's not intimidation. That's them calling and asking. And then we can go back into conspiracy theory. Well, why are they complaining? Why are they calling it intimidation? They think it was stolen, or they think, we're trying to overturn an election. And it's like, no, we're not. Never have been.
Help me out with a little bit of the numbers that you guys have generated as sort of estimates as to the percentage of registration that you think are questionable and kind of how you would have reached that conclusion.
When we did the, I'm trying to see if I can find it right now. When I talked about this, went out and we canvassed those folks, and we just asked a simple question. So we took the folks who voted in 2020, and we just went out and asked them to vote, and we returned in our small significant sample that, through using the mathematics, you can extrapolate up like they do in the polls. I think it was around 17% is what they said there was an issue. And and that's significant in us. Now, looking at the data and the data rolls, we have absentee ballots, so we can't go in and look at this voter cast this ballot and it wasn't what they voted for. You can never do that through the anonymous votes. But that's the kind of numbers that we were seeing. Maybe even a little more. I wish I had it. I should have put it right in front of me. But that's the type of stuff, and we're getting those kind of numbers. So it's not the 1 or 2 dead people. It's not the 5 duplicates. When we did that canvas, it was shocking that the numbers. And when you go out and you hear other states talk about their numbers, you're like, it's always around that number.
So that's actually creates an interesting issue when you do extrapolation for voter turnout. If basically 17% are not, how shall I say, are in fact ghost or phantom registration, questionable. But that's a much better word, much more questionable registration. That the turnout figures in general are much higher than we would have expected, unless, and that's the big question, unless some percentage of those 17 that have been identified as being questionable end up voting when they shouldn't be.
Well, that's what it was. We went to the ones that were listed as voted, and we asked the voter. So those votes happened.
Right.
It just
I'm sorry.
they said it wasn't us.
We're responding to a different question. Response
Okay.
is the number of the percentage of registrations that are questionable, which is sort of a separate issue. If you're able to go to somebody at their home or wherever and identify that they're there, they're more likely to be legitimately registered. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have that number when you look at the total million. Like when we went to the post office and the duplicates, I don't have that number available. But I mean, it was a rough number. Was around 70, 80,000. Now, what that comes out to be, and I always say we're scratching the surface also, because when we look at a person that we said may have died, like you said, you look at your place and were they over 100 years old? Well, as we went through COVID, how many young people died? How many people 30, 40, 50 years old? You can't go through every record. You do things like look for the ones that were most likely passed away over 100 and focus on them. I looked at things like the same first name. Well, in some cases, you can also go in there and say there was a Rob and a Robert, a Bob and a Robert. We found things that, and I didn't go into detail because that's very manual. The name was just spelt a little different. So that's why I said we're just scratching the surface. And I don't, it will take a lot of time, a lot of manual efforts, or maybe some artificial intelligence to go in and look for these similarities. And you start getting similarity numbers like these two from a model perspective are the same person. Let's see if they're truly a duplicate.
Mhm.
Well, there is software which is used in list management that are sort of fuzzy, that are used to dedupe, that at least identifies potential duplicates. And my understanding, that's a methodology that the Board of
Yeah.
Election has reluctant to use, but are
Yes.
used in other contexts. And that's one of the issues that we have is that
And that's perfect because that's the kind of tools that do exist, yes, but we're all volunteers which means we have no money. People are using their home computers to store lists and spreadsheets and do things and simple comparison functions. But when we do search it and go through a couple manual things, we are seeing it. So it's perfect opportunity for these tools that do exist, but it's not something that will scale from a financial and from a hours for the
Well,
you know
I think the point to be made is that's really a function of the Board of Elections to identify that. They have the resources to be able to do that.
yes,
Again, you've said that you're not looking for a conspiracy. I mean, there does seem to be a sort of institutional bias on the part of the Maryland Board of Elections to avoid removing people despite circumstances which suggests that they should be.
correct,
It is interesting. One of the changes that did take place, we had, of course, an executive director of the Board of Elections who was sometimes referred to as being on for life tenure, Linda Lamone. Now, she
yes,
retired, I guess not last year, but the year before, and was replaced by her deputy. But she had been on for 20 plus years. And it's interesting. I don't want to get too far afield, but it's worth noting that she has gotten afoul of the state legislature, including some Democratic senators, or at least one or more. I'm thinking of one particular state senator who was instrumental in getting the law changed that basically required a supermajority to remove her. And when that was going to happen, she ended up retiring in 2000. 2023.
yes,
She was nominated for another post by the governor in this last session, and a particular Democratic senator uh, came forward and blocked her nomination, and clearly had some issues about the way she handled the Board of Elections. That's a very long-winded setup, but I wanted to reach out. Have you guys worked with some of those Democrats who had questions about Linda Lamone's tenure with the Board of Elections, and what's been the upshot of that? If so,
we I have not, and I'm not aware of others who have talked to them about Linda Lamone, but we
right.
had a day of action kind of at the end of February where we had over 100 people at a rally in Lawyers Mall. And then after that, we went in and talked to the Democrats. Well, before and after that, we went and talked to the Democrats because to get anything done in Annapolis, it's going to take the Democrats. And we had very good conversations with them because you know, I think a lot of people want this to be fair and but it's convincing them that it's critical and if something needs to be done, whether it's voter ID, signature verification for mail-in ballots, it's
Right.
convincing them that it now's the time.
Well, but it's interesting. I mean, you do have a history there with Senator Cheryl Kagan, who
Yeah.
clearly had her issues with Linda Lamone.
Yes.
And I will tell you, I've argued that Democratic senators, or not just senators, but Democrats in contested primaries are perhaps the most vulnerable politicians in Maryland to potential hanky panky, where you have low turnout races in which um, there's a lot of movement, sometimes a lot of turnover in the housing, where how shall I say, committed party to take advantage of some of these um, questionable, use your word, questionable registrations might be a tempting target.
And Senator Kagan's office was one that we talked to. We talked to her chief of staff because she wasn't available, but I mean, very friendly. Took lots of notes. We talked about some of the bills that she was supporting, and we went back the next day and actually testified in her committee on the bills and supported some of hers. I mean, she had good bills there. Um, and so we support them. It's nonpartisan activity. So if it's a good bill, it's a good bill. If it's a bad bill, it's a bad bill. It's the way it goes. It's the way it should be.
It seems to me your work is very important and very good, but I would almost think the the board of elections would have some sort of studies going on or ways to audit elections. In Virginia, we talked about that. The governor's talked about auditing elections, taking a look back just to check, make sure the system's working good, or that we've gotten rid of potential fraud, just as a basic common sense. But does the board of elections?
Can I push back a little bit on that? I mean, one of the challenges with audit is that it's important to recognize where the vulnerability is.
Correct.
Whether or not an audit. So if problems with registration is the issue, then what are your systems to be able to go back and determine whether or not that was an issue or not?
Right, because when they talk about here is that they call it the risk limiting audit, which is really not an audit. It's you put some sample ballots in a scanner and you come out with the right answer. Therefore, everything's great. That is not an audit. That's a test. The most basic test you would do on a computer or hardware system. And but we're dealing with the registration. So what are the audits that you do to make sure that the registrations are accurate? Because the registrations are where the vulnerabilities come from. So are they going out and actually talking to the folks, or are they what are they doing? Are they proactive when it comes to dealing with other states? Because in Maryland, they get states from the health department when people die. They get information, but they don't talk to the other states. So a lot of the dead folks we found deceased were in other states.
Oh yeah.
It's driver's license. When you go get your driver's license in another state, they tell Maryland. Well, why don't they also tell when you register in another state? Why isn't there a consortium where the states tell other states and get
Yeah,
the NGO out of the middle?
yeah. I've known people registered in a couple states to
Yeah.
vote. So it's like, and I hate to say this, it wasn't. I knew someone who voted twice when I was a kid. I found out this guy I knew had voted twice because he was registered in New York and registered when he was here at George Mason University in Fairfax. Nobody caught him. And I guess there's no exchanging of information really.
And we look at things like if you sell your house, you get a bunch of papers when you sell your house. Why don't you give them either a change of registration or a removal registration form? So as they're closing on the house, they fill out the paperwork and you turn in the paperwork. I mean, these are simple things to address this problem.
We're coming up to the end, and I guess we wanted to give you an opportunity, David, to talk about, sort of summarize how you can get involved and if you have specific events that are coming up that you want to make people aware of.
Yeah, the important thing is, the easiest thing is securetovote.maryland.com. They are, I mean, it's all of our lawsuits, our events that we've had, the things that are coming up, summary reports of our data, it's all out there. And you can sign up to be active. I mean, we definitely need people who want to become active. Because things that are coming up is, this session's pretty much gone. It's gone through crossover. You got a little bit of time left. You want to we want to be prepared for next session. So we're looking at probably in the May time frame where we'll get with the legislators to start drafting bills. We got the Freedom Caucus now. But work with the Democrats to start crafting bills that will go into next year, build support this year. One of the bills I want to put together is this. I don't know if you saw the NTSB video about the Francis Scott Key Bridge. I mean, that's all over the place now. They did a really structured analysis of all aspects of the bridge to say it wasn't Maryland's fault, but is there things that people can do to make sure it doesn't happen in the future? So can we do something very similar with the voting rolls and registration rolls so that this doesn't happen in the future? Because the ship that hit the bridge is their fault. But car companies came up with seatbelts and airbags to protect you when somebody else is at fault. I mean, that's what we do. That's what you do in the engineering world. So we can do things to the system to make it safer in the future, and protect
good.
elections in the future.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being our guest on this show and telling us what Secure the Vote Maryland has been up to.
Right.
Dave,
Thank
as
you.
always, it's great to have you too.
Hey, great seeing you. Yeah, this was fun. I'd be willing to talk about other things. About getting into Annapolis in 2025 and then leading into 2026 elections. I mean, this is not all I do.
Can people contribute to your group through the website?
Yes.
Let's go down to Missoni's, where Italian cuisine shines. Let's go down to Missoni's, we'll have a good old time. Homemade pasta